with the why. And we're going to talk about the work and why we think that it's so important. So again, we've got a number of staff who've been integral in that this evening joining us. You're going to hear from two of them, Ellen Holder, the work that they've been doing in the classrooms and what that looks like around anti-racism. So with that, do an activator poll. So I am going to launch a poll here. These are questions that were added on a survey that was done in collaboration with the University of Chicago. Just some brief questions about comfort, about talking about race that you have with your children, and the frequency with which you discuss race with your children. So kind of open-ended here, but go ahead and participate in that poll, and then we're going to see how we compare to the national data. So go ahead, use the polling feature that just popped up on your screen.
Greg, do you want us all to do it?
Parents preferably.
Okay.
And again, if anyone else would like their name changed, feel free to just send me a message in the chat and I can adjust it for you.
All right. All right, give it about 10 more seconds. All right, so just jumping in here, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the polling data, share that with you, and I'm going to keep it up there just as a point of reference for us. So 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm on a delay, so hang on one second. That would mean that the live stream is up and running. All right, we should be good now. I need to turn the volume off. All right, so we drew these questions from a survey that was done by the University of Chicago, and they were looking at identity and the conversations that are happening with parents and educators with children. It's an opinion-based research, but they were looking at the impact of race and other social identity factors, the perception data, the frequency, and the comfort of the survey respondents around discussing these topics. They looked at social identities, including race and ethnicity, social class, gender, country of origin, family makeup, and religion. And some of the things they found were that, you know, the good news, 78% of the parents that they surveyed indicated that they were comfortable talking with their children about race and ethnicity, but only 63% of them, or 63% of those parents surveyed said they rarely or never discuss matters of race with their children. And so there's this idea that, you know, we're comfortable with it in the sense that we say we are, but we don't necessarily see those conversations happening. And so that's one of the things we wanted to look at tonight. They also noted from the educator perspective that there's a large uptick as children grow older in race-based conversations happening in classrooms with educators involved. Some of these are due to race-based incidents in the schools, in the community, in the media. Some of them are the very large-scale things. You know, the protests that we see happening, the shootings that make their way onto the news, you know, the riots at the Capitol and other things. And what this study, which is an interesting study, recommends is that we don't limit our conversations, our discussions around race in terms of being only for responding to situations, but actually to rethink it and reframe it really as a part of who we are. That's what we want to focus on tonight. I really appreciate you all being here with us. Those of you that weren't able to make it and are listening to the recording, thank you for being here with us. We're hoping to engage with you on this as well. And so this study talked a lot about different social identities. And the question would be, so why are we focusing on race and anti-racism? And the answer is that that's where Ashburton's data has led us. We've been taking a long look at our academic data, both opportunity and how our students are performing. We've been looking at our disciplinary data, And MCPS as a system has what they call the priority focus groups, which are Hispanic, African-American, non-farm students, and then all of our farm students as well. And when we look at our data and the system looks at theirs, even when we account for poverty, take poverty out of the equation, we are still finding that students who are not living in poverty, there's still a disparity by race in terms of how they perform, what opportunities they have, and how often they're sent to the office. And so identity is important, and race is a part of identity. And so how one sees themselves and how society sees someone is what we talk about when we're talking about identity. And so that's our focus on anti-racism. And I love the way that if you've ever been to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, they do anti-racism. And one of the things that they highlight is that it's not about being born racist or anti-racist. It's moving away from the idea of racism or racist as a pejorative. They talk about the choices that we make. And they also talk about our need to reflect, to be aware of who we are, and to make choices that are equitable throughout the day. And that's really become a heavy focus for our staff. And we've really emphasized that self-awareness, understanding our own identity, and how that situates us in a position of privilege. And so when we think about this, our work as a community, we don't see it as just teachers or students or just the parents. What we really are looking for is, a way for us as a three-legged stool to help guide us in our own work, to get our space in our building. And so we've engaged over the last couple of months in a book study on Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. We are also using the text that we're using with students. This book is anti-racist as a part of a book study, but we got good coaching from some folks within MCPS and then some nationally known authors who really challenged us to think beyond the book study. It tends to be a place of comfort for white educators. And so we've taken the philosophies and taken the actions that we're charged with in this work and really woven it into our school improvement work. We've created professional learning sessions for staff. And there's been this beautiful racism PLC that has been completely led by staff. It's based on staff feedback. We've got our staff members leading it. In terms of COVID, with everything that's uncertain, the one thing that is certain is that the actions that we should cancel every week, that's the one that's going to go off without a hitch. And so out of that group came this notion that we wanted to take action, right? Move the book study. We very much wanted to create a space for our students to learn and to reflect. And so we've targeted that morning meeting time. We're going to be using This Book is Anti-Racist with our grade 4 and 5 students to really focus on their learning about race and they're being able to dialogue and reflect about it. And so we're really excited about the ability to take that to students because, to be quite honest, they're already having these discussions, especially in the upper grades. And it's not just when we have these large incidents in the media play out, but it could be very small things that happen on the playground. Or we're finding a lot of it is coming out of their study of the curriculum in social studies and in math and reading. And so what we knew is that we needed to with parents as well. And we're kind of tonight as an informational purpose to kick off a coming series of parent workshops for reflection with our parents. We have monthly sessions planned that are open to parents and guardians, caregivers at all grade levels. We want to engage with you in the same type of dialogue, the same type of support that we're providing our students, really around how do you have conversations with your children about race in the household. If that's something that you want support with, if that's something you find yourself in need of assistance, we'll be able to help you here. And again, we've got this group of parents that we've been bouncing ideas off of for the last couple of weeks. And they're one of their biggest highlight items is that these sessions must be engaging. And so I wouldn't use tonight as a litmus or as a baseline for that. We're looking for creative ways to make these sessions engaging and for us to be able to work together. And then also to provide a lot of resources and support. So we really do this as a three-legged approach. It's a collaborative approach to developing our capacity as an anti-racist community. And so I'm going to stop talking there, but I want to introduce Ellen Holder and Hannah Klein, two of our phenomenal teachers, many of whom are here tonight, to talk about their experiences. I think especially since the protests and events that last. We had just started closing down schools. We're dealing with a dual pandemic, COVID and racism. And these are the ones that were on the front lines, really working with our kids to understand, to process what they were seeing and hearing. And support of all the other staff members that were here. But Ellen and Hannah, if you guys would introduce yourselves and then just kind of jump in and share what it's looked like since the spring.
Sure. I'm Ellen Holder. I teach second grade, and going back to last year after we shut down, like Greg was saying, in the throes of everything that was happening, I was just looking, I realized that I had to say something. I hadn't been doing enough. I've read a lot of different things about race and racism. It was something that was always interesting and passionate inside of me, but I hadn't been doing enough with my students. And so that day that we came back to school, I read a book called Something Happened in Our Town, which was about a police shooting of a Black man. And we talked about it. And I think I decided to do it and then told Greg, but Greg was 100% on board. And every day till the end of the school year, I made sure that I read something, and not all depressing and crazy, but also like, uplifting as well, a mixture of all kinds of books, and started analyzing what it was that I needed to add to my practice as an educator so that the kids that are being raised right now are going to end up in a different world than what we have currently. So things like evaluating my teaching practices, evaluating my classroom library, making sure that my books that represented Black people and people of other ethnicities besides white were not just about civil rights, but just main characters in stories that are positive and uplifting, and that every kid in my class could see themselves in literature in my classroom. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do. And then we got the book study going in the staff, and I just have to say that the amount of positive response from our staff has been overwhelming, and especially because we are a staff of white teachers mostly, and which is something that we recognize that we would also like to change. But I think that it's really important. And so moving forward, once something's out of the headlines and it's really easy to like, oh, this is something that everybody's talking about back in June and the summer with all the protests, and now keeping it going, keeping the focus on making sure that every child is represented in positive ways in our classrooms all the time, and role models are of every skin tone, of every, everybody's represented. So, and I think at the second grade level, that's what I can do. And I'm also I really talk to them very honestly and openly. Today we talked about Thurgood Marshall, and I showed them a graphic of all the Supreme Court justices there's ever been. And there's been something like, I can't remember the number now, but it's like 7 that were non-white men in 228 years. And we talked about how that's not good enough. And I was like, which ones of you are going to be Supreme Court justices? We got to change this. So I'm just doing what I can, and I want to do more.
I think Ellen gave us the perfect setup here to hand over to Ms. Klein, because Ms. Klein's one of the 4th grade teachers that's done a tremendous amount of work to diversify the literature that we're using with students. And it was her team that actually came up, kind of their mantra was that the next Supreme Court justice could actually be sitting in the classroom now. And so they wanted to make sure that they saw their students, that they were being well represented. So Ms. Klein, you want to come in here and talk about your experience?
Sure, yeah. So, when things first happened last spring and the events were first starting to kind of crop up on more of a national scale, I remember all I could think about was how uncomfortable I felt and how that discomfort must have been times a trillion for these kids. Because the thing about 4th graders is they are so young and they have so many questions, but they have so much access to so much information. And I just kept thinking about all of the posts that they were seeing online. And I remember a student telling me watching a video of George Floyd on TikTok. And so with that in mind, I think one of the most important reasons for this work is that the kids want this work. The kids are asking these questions. The kids know that this is happening. They need a space to be able to ask those questions, even if we're not going to be able to give those answers. Because I think, much like in second grade, how we need to be posing these questions and thinking about them, by fourth grade, it's time to start deciding how we're going to take that into action. And so something that my incredible co-teacher, Ms. Wiliszewski, and I did at the end of our first unit this year, which was a study of government in action, we added on a couple of additional lessons. And so the unit itself was wonderful. It talked about legislature and how voting works and things like that. But we really just felt that there were some folks of the global majority whose experiences just were not represented. And so we took an article about the Million Man March from 2020, from this past summer. And we read about Reverend Al Sharpton, can't remember the name, I'm sorry, who was proposing legislation now about what could be done to make change going forward. And we used that as kind of a springboard for this idea that, yes, we study government as this structure, but really we are the people, and the government is not a fixed thing. And so we have the ability to take action and make change. So with everything going along with the election this year, my fourth graders, I mean, they're still on TikTok, right? They're still seeing and hearing and learning about all of these things. And especially with events like the insurrection, more and more questions just keep popping up. And we can't pretend that those don't exist. I think that one of the most important things I could possibly have done this past year was ask my students what they needed from the grown-ups, from us, because there are so many kids who are sitting at home alone, not totally understanding why they're seeing what they're seeing. And when those questions go unanswered, you breed anxiety and fear, and you risk misunderstandings and biases that could have been unpacked if given the chance. So something that we did recently on Inauguration Day, I asked my students to write letters to the new administration about what they want the new grown-ups to do in the White House. And I have to say, some of their letters actually brought me to tears, because I was expecting things like, I want pizza every Friday. And I was getting things like, I know that people are making bad choices and they're grown-ups. And why is that? And what are you going to do about it? And the fact that a 9-year-old put those words into sentences on her own with absolutely no suggestion from me, I think that right there is the reason why this work is important. They're gonna do it anyway. We may as well be there to support them through it and to help build a structure so that, like Ellen said, our kids grow up in a better place than they do right now.
I want to say, this class is right, that the work is hard. The work can sometimes be uncomfortable, especially for the adults. And at any point in time, this staff could have decided that, there's a lot going on right now, but we need to, focus on just this one pandemic rather than the dual pandemic. And they didn't. They've continued to come back and say this work is valuable and important, and it's for our kids. So thank you to Ms. Klein. Thank you to Ms. Holder for the experiences. And then our story starts off with Yael here, who came to us when we said, we really want to act. We really want to develop our understanding as a staff. And Yael, who is our instructional specialist in the restorative justice unit, I'm gonna let her introduce herself, is gonna walk us through some of the work that we've been doing here, what it's gonna look like. And then at the end of that, we're gonna open it up to the group for questions and answers and get some feedback from you all. So Yael, do you wanna yourself and Tway?
Perfect, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Yael Astor. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the restorative justice instructional specialists with MCPS. And I have had the amazing gift to just be immersed in the Ashburton community for the last few months and be a part of professional learning and now be a part of 4th and 5th grade planning as we move forward with experiences engaged in this book is Anti-Racist. I'm going to share with you a little bit about the work, the framework of the book, and then preview some of the lessons with you all. And so as we heard from Greg, from Ellen, from Hannah, what we know is that kids are not too young. The research shows us that kids are not too young. By 3 months, they're already noticing race. And at 5 to 7 year old age range, we see that conversations about race can dramatically improve kids' racial attitudes in as little as a single week is what it says there. And so I have that infographic hyperlinked for you if you want to dig into that research a little bit more. We're using this book is Anti-Racist, part of the framework that I actually learned in a variety of different workshops that I've taken with Tiffany Jewell. She uses the anti-bias education for young children and ourselves framework. On the left, we have this infographic, which basically captures the gist of the framework, and it has 4 different goals. The first goal is related to identity, and that's self-love. We spend time in community affirming identity, sharing our identities, and sharing of ourselves, hearing from one another. And I love the word that Ellen used earlier, like uplifting, right? And so everything in goal 1 is all around that affirmation, that centering of joy. In goal 2, we're talking about diversity, and that's embracing difference. And so we hear a lot of language of we are different, we are the same, and students are really encouraged to share with one another who they are and also talk about their differences. And goal 1 and 2 is where in anti-bias education in the framework, they say we spend the most amount of time because that's where we're developing our comfort levels with one another and normalizing conversations about difference. As we move into goal 3, we're talking about justice or injustice, as it were. And students are learning accurate language to be able to name injustice. And as staff, we're facilitating conversations around why the injustice exists, right? So like historical context, maybe, and then we go into historical context, right? But why the injustice is there. And again, I can't emphasize enough, it's really about students having the accurate language to be able to name it. And then in goal 4, fostering and nurturing activism, what are we going to do about injustice? And that's where students are demonstrating empowerment. And so I really loved hearing from Hannah what students are already doing. As far as their activism goes, like writing letters to government, seeing themselves in government. And so that's the gist of the framework, which Tiffany Jewell uses within her book. Here on this slide, you'll see 3 different resources, including one, which is a video where Tiffany Jewell is speaking to us as adults doing this work alongside students. So there's no expectation that the adult, the staff member, is the holder of all the knowledge and imparting that into students, but we're really going through this book together alongside one another and engaging deeply in conversations. And again, starting with goal 1, and we very quickly got into goals 2 through 4. So now the gist of the learning experience, before we get to that, within each morning meeting space, the goals are to support kids along their identity development journey. And what we know is that students have multifaceted identities. So you are not just one thing. And part of normalizing conversations around identity and diversity is making that space for students to show up as their whole selves and welcome others who have identities that are similar to and different than their own. Within our morning meeting spaces, we're also fostering, appreciating and honoring different identities. We're developing kids' language to name injustice. We're going to nurture a sense of activism, and we're going to engage in readings and reflection alongside kids. So I can't emphasize enough that within these spaces, we are doing things with our community of learners and not for them, not to them. So the slides are linked, so you have a snapshot of what the lesson entails for each chapter. I'm going to quickly go through each one so that we then have enough time for question and answer session. Connecting through art, Tiffany Jewell gave us a beautiful guide to, she wrote one for educators, she wrote one for families and caregivers, and I have that linked in for you as well. So this is pulled directly from that, where we're just starting to analyze these posters and just familiarize ourselves with the artwork and just engaging in chatting and connecting with one another. So it's really an analysis of images. In exploring language, we are front-loading, previewing a lot of the key terms that'll come up in the first couple of chapters. And the point of this, again, is just to start to generate some dialogue and students preview some of these words. And then we'll go into them deeply as we start to make our way through the chapters. So these are the first two lessons that are straight from Tiffany Jewell's guide. And you'll see now in the coming up lessons that almost all of this comes directly from the book. My writing partner and I have layered in some additional discussion questions just to make sure that we are deeply engaged in conversation with one another. So I know this is very like visually stimulating right now. It's plenty of slides. The idea is not that just in one morning meeting, we're necessarily going through a complete chapter. Chapter 1 is certainly the longest. And in this chapter, we're starting to explore identity, personal identity, not specific yet into social identity. That'll come up in chapter 2. And again, this is where we are just starting to build, or I shouldn't say starting, excuse me, continuing to build our community and starting to have that vulnerability and sharing who we are with one another. Then in chapter 2, we start to dig into what are our social identities. And students are not ever obligated or required to share, but again, through going in this progression, hopefully they're developing more of a comfort level with opening up to one another around these topics. So you could see we're sharing about our identity, what we're aware of, maybe what we're not so aware of. So starting to build our critical consciousness. Then chapter 3, we start to get into race. What is race? What is ethnicity? And we have the definitions throughout. And excuse me, I should have said, prior to even getting into the questions and activities that are in the slide deck, as a class, we'll be reading the content together, and there is a glossary. So as vocab words are coming up, we're pausing, we're looking up the words, we're talking about them, and then the slides here are like the more structured dialogue that we engage in with one another. So it's a combination of the activities that Tiffany Jewell has laid out for us, as well as then the layered in discussion questions around the content. And so you'll see here for race, a social construction, we have Ta-Nehisi Coates and his very famous quote, but race is the child of racism, not the father. And then questions to for students to think deeply about that and what that means. For chapter 4, what is racism? So here is where we're going to look at what is personal racism or individual racism. And again, looking at the definition as a class, talking about the definition, and then we start to take a look at why is racism toxic to everyone, regardless of what our individual racialized identities are. We are all negatively, adversely impacted by racism. And so we start to unpack that. And then for chapter 5, what is racism institutional? And again, we'll go through the content in the book where Tiffany Jewell really lays it out for us, and then reflect on these questions together, looking at examples of institutions and how it shows up in our lives. So that's the gist of section 1, which are chapters 1 through 5. And some resources we put in here for you are just wherever you are in your journey. If you wanted to go more deeply into any of these topics, here you have a combination of a variety of different resources.
So that's the overview of the work. One of the things I wanted to add, I hope what you weren't hearing in the presentation was that we're going to be assigning homework and written responses and graded rubrics or anything like that. What we're looking to do is read that morning meeting structure that we have such a successful time of the day. It was one of our priorities when we built out our virtual learning schedule. It is something we carried over from actually being in the building, and really rethink it to be able to create this space for our students to learn and reflect together. So if you have questions, feel free to use the chat to drop them in. Depending upon what the question is, we might ask one of our awesome teachers to answer the questions, or we could talk about it programmatically, but we can certainly talk about that. So what's the rationale behind nurturing a sense of activism? Maybe it might be a little semantics, but what we want to do, Ed, thank you for that question. I can probably take that, and maybe Yael, if you want to jump in here too, is that we have this opportunity to really create a sense of being an ally within our students. So recognizing injustice, being able to stand up for it. Activism, simply, calling out something that's not right and responding to it, helping others to understand. And it's also the things up the ladder, like Ms. Klein demonstrated, we're writing letters or, campaigning or things like that. So I think that's what we're looking at there. It's a great question.
If I can add on, I think it may be helpful. The letter writing campaign was suggested by my students. So I think the focus is really on whatever it is that the particular class is advocating for. That was more of an extreme example.
I'll say one of my favorite activism stories with our kids is last year when Ms. Hill was here, there was a group of young women who held their own little protest on the playground so that they wanted fair and equitable treatment with the soccer field. And that was we actually used it as a great learning point. And so I think that was that we really wanted to elevate as an example there. So great question about the 4th and the 5th grade curriculum. So it's not a curriculum per se. It's actually more of reflection questions that are being asked. There will be variations between grades 4 and 5, and there may even be variations between one 4th grade teacher and another. We really want the pace of it to be the needs of the kids in the classroom. And so our teachers have the flexibility to really use that space, the days throughout the morning meetings to be able, to go more in depth with their students where the students' energy is. I don't know, Michelle Greco or Katie Burton want to jump in here. They've been two of the grade level leaders that we've worked with to plan this.
Yeah, no, I think what Greg said is right. I think, the idea is that we'll let families know on a weekly basis, kind of our plan for the next week, but we want to allow space for the kids to be able to talk about. So we're all using the same book though. That is something both 4th and 5th grade are doing. I know that was asked in the chat. So that's kind of leading our work, the books that all of the kids brought home with them in 4th and 5th grade. So that's leading our work in 4th and 5th grade, but what that looks like in each classroom could kind of depend on, our kids' reflections as we kind of present some of those questions to them and where that leads them.
And can I add one more thing, which is that I think our plan is to get through as much of this as possible, but we want to make sure that we have time to engage in discussions around each chapter. So I think that there's a chance that we may not reach the very end this school year. So I think, I think when we kind of figure out at the grade level where we end, that may carry over into the next year from fourth going to fifth, if that makes sense.
And also in fifth, I mean, the curriculum, we've already, the historical piece of this, we've already touched upon a whole lot of it already in our study of the American Revolution. We're talking about which groups are left out of the Declaration of Independence, which groups are left out of the Constitution. Is it really we, the people, and are all created equal? And we're also talking about westward expansion and what went along with westward expansion, like what happened to the land, what happened to slave states that have sort of gone west with land acquisition. So it's not something that's additional for at least the fifth graders to be exposed to. We're already doing it in the curriculum that we're teaching. This is something that's sort of solidifying what they're already learning in school.
So there's a couple of questions about the space itself, and there was one mention of asking if you could opt out of this. So first off, it is about the space, and we want space to be safe and inviting for all of our students as we go through this work. If we find that there are students that are not comfortable with it, or if there are parents that are not comfortable with it, we're more than willing to connect with those parents or students and find out how we can make the space more comfortable and inviting. So if there's any concerns about that, you'll see in our survey, you have the option to reach out to us to follow up with you individually to discuss it further. Regarding, again, I don't want everyone to construe this the same thing as the math curriculum or the benchmark literacy curriculum. It's more about the space and the use of the book as a discussion guide. What we are doing here workshops, the first of which is next week, we're going to be presenting an overview of the content to parents so that you all know exactly what we're talking about in the classroom. We're going to provide you with resources and support to continue those conversations with children as well. Great question about finding racism at Ashburton and dismantling it. So a couple of examples that I mentioned at the top of the meeting are around the opportunities and the academic performance of our students. We do have disparities there that are very much in line with the disparities we're finding across MCPS regarding who has access to rigorous coursework. And I have to say, to commend the staff that better about it, but we could continue to do much better. The other piece is the disciplinary approach. So if we have students who are being sent too frequently to the office or in need of that behavioral support, we're seeing disparities there as well. So that's something that we're looking to focus on as well. A couple of questions in the chat about extending this to the younger grade. We're not quite that, although we do have an intention of going down, but not with this particular book. This book is approved and has been vetted for use in grades 4 and 5. We're looking at how to extend this learning to the younger grades, but we're also looking for parents to be involved in that. So one of the things in this survey at the end of this meeting is, if you're really interested in being a part of that discussion, we'd love to involve you in that. We're going to ask you for some contact information because we just haven't determined that quite yet. So a question about the categorization of different. So really that was part of a discussion that we had with the 5th grade team today. Kids are going to categorize the way that they're comfortable with and that they're familiar with. There's no requirement for X number of this or X number of that. Really, this is just about creating that space for our kids to engage in conversation. Again, I can't highlight that enough. This is very much about the space and the learning that we're doing, creating a reflective space for our students, a place for them to process it, and a place for them to do some learning around race and anti-racism. So that's very much what it is. It's not a curriculum that we picked up off the shelf somewhere and decided we were going to use, but we're really tailoring this to the needs of our kids and our community. These are great questions, and I do appreciate them. I'm going to give it another minute or so to see if anything else comes up in the chat. And again, we do have a post survey for this session. And if there are further questions, if something comes up that you think about, feel free to add that in there. All right, so I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to let you know that we do have that survey that I mentioned. This is going to be really helpful for us in planning. I'm dropping it into the chat here. We're focusing on, what it is from the perspective of a parent that you would want to see in a workshop session. What can we help you with in this area of anti-racism? How can we focus our efforts, and do you want to be involved? And we're looking for volunteers who are interested in helping us think through these sessions. I did drop the chat or the survey into the chat, but we want to know your thoughts. We want to know what you think the design should include, where we should be focusing the efforts. And so we definitely want to hear from you. And just one more before I jump back in there, one more shameless plug. We do have another evening meeting for parents this week. I know it's a very hot topic, but we'll be having our third in a series of town halls about the MCPS reopening plan. I'm going to be providing some updates about the Board of Education's February 9th, that's tomorrow, meeting, any changes that they may be taking up or considering regarding the reopening of schools and the planning for it. So again, I'll be sending out a reminder for that, but please do make sure that you check your community update email for the Zoom and the information. So we also said we're having our first parent workshop session. It's on Tuesday, February 16th. We're making it available at 11:45 or 7 p.m. Topics are going to include a discussion around identity, dominant culture, privileged race, ethnicity, personal racism, and institutional racism. Very much the same content that aligns with Yael's talk through the first few sections of the book. We'll talk about the book itself, and we'll go more in depth about that reflection that we're doing with our students and how we can work with you all to support meaningful discussions at home. So again, as you are headed out of our virtual meeting tonight, do take time to give us feedback through the survey. Let us know if you're interested in being a part of the design work for this. And we'll hang around for a few more minutes if there's any other questions we can answer. And if not, we appreciate y'all being here with us this evening, helping us to undertake this very important